Good afternoon. I'm David Mansuri, President and CEO of the State Collaborative on Reforming Education, and it's great to be with you all this afternoon. I'm also joined today by Dr. Sharon Roberts, SCORE's Chief K-12 Impact Officer. We want to welcome you to the SCORE Institute on High-Dosage Tutoring, and it's our hope today is able to share key research, examples, and practices around how Tennessee can leverage high-dosage tutoring as an essential learning, recovery, and acceleration practice as the state enters the recovery phase of the pandemic, and perhaps an enduring change in school practice in the long term. Whether you're an educator, a district leader, a policymaker, a community partner, a parent, a member of a higher education faculty, or otherwise just interested in education, we hope that you'll see this as a first conversation on how we can emerge with a stronger education system as the state recovers from the pandemic. It's been a little over a year since COVID-19 first forced communities across the state to close. Tennessee's educators and district leaders, much like their counterparts across the country, have done significant work to provide students with learning opportunities and critical supports during an unprecedented crisis.
This work has, whether students have been in virtual, hybrid, or in-person learning, educators have had to nimbly respond to disruptions in school operations, adopt new practices to engage students, and keep an eye on students' futures while so much around them has been going on. It's because of these efforts that some of the worst predictions of the pandemic on student learning might not come to be. So thank you to all of the educators, leaders, and partners who kept students at the center and did the work.
Totally agree. And I think it's in that roll up your sleeve spirit that we wanted to better understand high dosage tutoring as a concrete practice to accelerate student learning, both in the pandemic and beyond the pandemic. Despite really valiant efforts, we know that instructional and learning loss are real areas of concern, and even more so for students of color and those from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. Just a couple of key data points here. Black and Hispanic students disproportionately did not have in-person learning options or did not choose them out of a concern for safety. Economically disadvantaged students were more likely to face digital divide challenges, which contributed to challenges around engaging with learning. Both of these trends contribute to initial evidence of learning loss that we'll learn more about in the coming months through the state's annual assessments. There are also signs that these challenges are not just limited to K-12 learning outcomes, as we saw a nearly 20% drop in statewide community college enrollment last year, an example of losing students at a really important and key transition point in education.
And David, these trends are reflected in the networks of districts that SCORE works closely with. And they've reported decreases in student enrollment, especially for students in pre-K and kindergarten, high levels of disengagement in virtual learning, and increases in chronic absenteeism, interruptions to in-person learning due to cases of COVID in schools, and challenges in facilitating key learning that is best done in person, such as teaching students in early grades to read.
We also know, though, that Tennessee's in a really strong position to address many of these issues given recent actions from state leadership. For example, Tennessee will receive $2.5 billion in federal funds to aid in recovery, adding to a total of $4 billion, or an average of $4,000 per public school student in the state. And Tennessee was the first state in the country to adapt recovery policies during the January special session of the legislature, offering kindergarten through 8th grade students multiple weeks of learning camps focused on English and math, supporting the expansion of tutoring, grounding early literacy instruction and phonics, and preserving our statewide assessments to provide key data to inform recovery efforts.
One way I think about this moment, the state and its districts can make good use of these time-limited funds to accelerate student learning and show what's possible with this additional support. I think it's in this context that it's so important we talk about practices like high-dosage tutoring that can be a student-centered approach that we start in the initial recovery work and turn into an enduring practice as we get to a new normal for teaching and learning. I think back on my over 40 years as an educator, from when I was a teacher, a school leader, and eventually a district leader. And the number of ways I tried to address the question of how do I catch my students up who've missed learning? For today's conversation, I want to call out that tutoring is not new. In speaking with many of you on today's webinar and across the state, so many of us have seen tutoring attempted in the past. I myself was skeptical initially about the research. I had done tutoring before and not really seen an impact. However, as you'll hear today, high dosage tutoring is not the same tutoring from the past, which was more like homework or extra help, with students seeing different tutors at different and often not enough times. There's a lot that it will take to make impactful practice, but we all are going to have to embrace some shifts in our thinking around what it means to do tutoring. I hope today's webinar accelerates your learning to get to see its promise the way I have come to see it. I'm so pleased that we'll get to hear from Dr. Susanna Loeb, Acting Executive Director of the National Student Support Accelerator, who will walk us through what looks to be a rare and overwhelming research consensus on the effectiveness of well-designed high-dosage tutoring to improve student learning. I'm also honored to have Dr. Jeannie Barker and Dr. Carrie Randolph share real examples of Tennessee districts, one small and rural, the other large and urban, who've actually started this work. As you'll hear from them today, they're taking a continuous improvement, start small before going big approach to this work, as I suspect you will too, given that there's both a lot on your plate right now and still so much more that our students need from us. Following presentations from each of these experts and leaders, we will have a moderated discussion led by Courtney Bell, SCORE's Senior Director of Research and Innovation, and some time for Q&A. We encourage you to submit questions as you have them using the Q&A function on Zoom. After this webinar, we'll also share some options for district and school leaders who are interested in implementing high dosage tutoring and would like additional consultations and problem-solving support.
So on behalf of the SCORE team and the students who have and will continue to benefit from the hard work of those who are on this Zoom with us today and the commitment of folks on this call to improve, thank you for taking the time to learn with us. And also want to say just a special thanks at the beginning of our program to Peter Tang, SCORE's Director of Research, for all of his work in putting today's program together.
Thanks, David. As we get started, I wanted to begin with a quick opportunity to engage you by asking two questions about your level of familiarity with and interest in high dosage tutoring. On your screen, you should see two multiple choice questions that we'd love your feedback on. Later in the webinar, we're going to ask about specific aspects of high dosage tutoring and where you might need additional support. So as you'll see, how familiar are you with the research on this? And then the second question, based on discussions and interest in your district, what's your district's plan to incorporate high dosage tutoring as a learning acceleration strategy? Just a few more seconds to let you respond and submit your answers. All right, let's see the poll results. All right, as we can see, we're just about across the board on whether we're very familiar to not familiar at all. Probably outlier is the one that's a little stronger, is somewhat familiar. And based on the rest of the information there, we're kind of across the board and what your districts are thinking about. So sounds like we're in a great place today to talk a little bit more about this topic. So thank you for participating in the survey, and I appreciate the range of experience and thoughts that we have out in the field. I know our panelists appreciate knowing where you are in your thinking as we really dive into the information and examples today. Susanna Loeb is the director of the Annenberg Institute, professor of education and international and public affairs at Brown University. Her research focuses broadly on education policy and its role in improving educational opportunities for students. Her work has addressed issues of educator career choices and professional development, of school finance and governance, and of early childhood systems. Susanna is also the acting executive director of the National Student Support Accelerator, a new organization focused on helping districts, nonprofits, and tutoring providers scale high-impact tutoring with quality. Thanks for being with us today, Susanna.
Thank you for having me. I am going to share my screen, hopefully effectively. Let's see if I can do this. Here we go. Okay, I hope you all can see that. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to share what we're learning about tutoring. As you just heard, the National Student Support Accelerator envisions a time when all students in need have access to an effective tutor who supplements their classroom experiences and really champions their learning and success. We are working towards this vision, not actually by operating tutoring programs ourselves, but by developing communities of practice, reviewing and synthesizing the research, and using both those communities of practice and the research to develop practical tools and technical assistance to help districts and nonprofits launch new tutoring programs or improve existing tutoring programs. For today, I'm hoping to share the research-backed drivers of equity and quality in tutoring that can provide a strong foundation for your work in Tennessee and beyond. As we all know, and as you've heard already today, the pandemic has impacted students, and it's had a particularly severe impact on low-income students and students of color. As you can see in this graph, schools with a majority of white students, the blue dots, lost ground, with students learning only about 90% as much as students did in previous years in reading and 60% in math. But for those in schools serving the majority of students of color, the learning reductions were far worse. Students in these schools only learned about 77% of what they had in previous years in reading and far less in math, adding to already substantial learning differences. So what can we do? Well, we know from research that tutoring is an unusually effective approach for accelerating student learning. In fact, it is more effective than almost any other intervention that's been tested. Its effectiveness in many ways is not surprising, given that tutoring can target the specific needs of each student, and tutoring from a consistent tutor can help students develop close adult-student relationships, which can improve students' engagement in school and really their overall well-being. In fact, tutoring is often the intervention of choice for those who can afford it. About $42 billion were spent in tutoring last year alone, benefiting many students, but certainly increasing inequalities in access to educational opportunities. Our efforts are focused on increasing equity by providing this highly effective intervention for students who are in need. In addition to the clear benefits for students, tutoring can also have benefits for the tutors and for the teacher pipeline. Tutoring can be an on-ramp to the teaching profession, creating a hands-on experience to help tutors understand whether tutoring is a good fit for them as a career. In addition, tutors are recruited, if they are recruited from the local community or the local college, tutoring can provide a pipeline of opportunity for the teacher workforce so that the workforce can move closer to reflecting the students being served. However, as we know, people define tutoring in many ways, and not all approaches are effective. In fact, during the No Child Left Behind era, parents whose children were in schools failing to meet adequate yearly progress for 2 or more years were able to sign their children up for tutoring outside of school. This may sound like a good idea, but it was not particularly effective. Only 23% of eligible students participated, and for those students, the average impact was close to 0, though it did work in a couple of places. However, tutoring demonstrated some positive outcomes even during NCLB, and those couple of places, those effects tended to be in places with minimum dosage requirements, more structured tutoring sessions, and stronger coordination with schools. So not all tutoring is effective, but evidence does point to several critical elements of effective tutoring, what we're going to call high impact tutoring. So an impressive body of literature. This really isn't common in education research, as many of you know. There's a really large body of evidence that supports the evidence of specific models of tutoring. And from these models, we can see common elements for high impact. Based on the research and many conversations with educators and other leaders in the field, we've synthesized these elements into a framework for high impact tutoring, which we have a picture of here. In particular, 7 elements are critical. The first 3 are really foundational elements of equity, safety, and cohesion. And they support 4 model-specific elements related to the tutor, to instruction, to learning integration, and to data use. I'll go into each of these a little bit. So 3 elements are essential to set the foundation of any high impact tutoring program. First, the program must be grounded in equity. This means ensuring students who need it most have access to it. And it means that the tutors lead sessions with equity at the center of their instruction. Second, the program must ensure student safety. And this means designing tutoring programs in which students and their information are safe and protected. Tutoring programs can build safety protocols in a number of innovative ways. During the pandemic, for example, many programs shifted to virtual tutoring, which allowed them to do things like scanning sessions for inappropriate language, on top of the more typical safety-focused processes, such as observation of sessions by supervisors and background checks and training for tutors. The final foundational element is really an element of good programs overall, which is that they have effective leaders who make sure that their elements and internal systems work together cohesively towards the program goals. Equity, safety, and cohesion are fundamental to strong programs. Now let's turn to model-specific elements. The first one is the tutor. Effective programs place a high priority on developing a strong tutor-student relationship, which requires having a consistent tutor who not only has command of appropriate content knowledge, but just as importantly is skilled at engaging students and developing positive relationships. Effective programs also provide oversight and coaching for tutors. This said, a wide variety of people can become high impact tutors. While teachers have proven to be particularly effective teachers, paraprofessionals can also be effective tutors and may be more feasible to employ as tutors than teachers for both cost and logistical reasons. Tutoring programs staffed by volunteers and university students have displayed positive, though smaller impacts than those staffed by teachers and paraprofessionals. So high impact tutoring programs have strong tutors who have received initial training and have ongoing coaching and evaluation. The second model-specific element is instruction, not surprisingly. High-impact tutoring requires special attention to the amount of instruction and to the instructional materials used. Evidence shows that to be high-impact, students need to see their tutors at least 3 times a week for at least a semester, and better yet, a full school year. Instructional minutes per session can vary depending by age or grade level and still be effective. 30 minutes is effective for the earlier grades, but older students benefit from somewhat longer sessions of 45 minutes or an hour. The quality of instruction is, of course, important as well. Certified experienced teachers can often provide high quality instruction without additional supports, but most teachers or most tutors need quality materials. In the best case scenario, the school is using high quality materials that tutors can use and build off of. However, if the school's curricular materials are not particularly strong, or the school doesn't have time to fully engage with tutors, a high impact tutoring program will supplement the classroom materials with other high quality materials that are aligned to state standards. The third model-specific element of high-impact tutoring is integration. How a program is integrated into a student's existing learning can also drive impact. Programs that are embedded in school, in the school day, or are directly before or after school are particularly effective. Primarily, this integration with schools is important because these programs have higher attendance, and for equity reasons, they are able to reach the students who need tutoring the most. Programs that offer outside the school day have a much more difficult time with this. Embedding tutoring in the school day also gives tutors and teachers opportunities to share information, and students are more likely to see their tutors as part of their larger school experience. Family integration can also benefit tutoring programs. Engaging with students' families creates another opportunity for relationship building and learning about each student's particular needs, experiences, and abilities. The fourth and last model-specific element of high-impact tutoring isn't really the least important. It is data. High-impact programs use data to understand students' learning needs and to track their progress. These data can come from the school or from the teacher, or the program, or the teacher or the program can do their own formative assessments to track progress and design tutoring sessions to meet the needs of individual students. Tutoring is so great because it can address students' needs, but you need to know what those needs are. Regardless of the source of data, what is important is the use of data to tailor instruction for students. High-impact programs also use data regularly to track overall program progress and to identify trends or areas for improvement. There are a number of barriers, that was a lot. There are a number of barriers to implementing high-impact tutoring, tutoring that has these elements that we've been talking about. The biggest barriers in the past have been scheduling tutoring into already existing school schedules, funding, and having enough information to make it easy for districts to adopt tutoring with quality. However, we're finding in our pilot sites, we're working with about 10 pilot sites across the country, that we have a window of opportunity right now. With schools already being disrupted and focused on finding solutions, school leaders are searching for and considering new options, including adjusting schedules. Funding is also easier, really amazingly easier, for at least the next couple of years. A portion of the COVID relief funding must be spent to address learning loss with evidence-based interventions, and tutoring is clearly an evidence-based practice, so new funding will be available for it. Finally, recent research has allowed us to better understand what drives impact in tutoring, so we have a much clearer understanding of best practices and are working towards tools and capacity to scale tutoring with quality. This may be the best opportunity we will have to get this proven intervention built into schools for the long run, to provide all students in need with the high impact tutoring to supplement their classroom work and as part of their core instruction. After a tremendous amount of research and outreach, we recently launched the National Student Support Accelerator to make it easier for districts and schools and nonprofits to adopt high impact tutoring. Our vision, as you can see, is that every student in need has access to an effective tutor who champions and ensures their learning and success. The accelerator plans to reach this vision by supporting districts, schools, nonprofits, and tutoring organizations to adopt and grow high-impact tutoring with quality. Our three primary strands of work are to catalyze the field of tutoring, through communities of practice, research, and conducting pilot sites. To facilitate implementation through providing tools and technical assistance for districts and tutoring providers to launch and grow high-impact tutoring, and to engage and activate stakeholders. Our materials and tools are available on our website, and over time, more will be added. We're working on a district playbook that I'm hoping will be really useful. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share what research tells us about tutoring. This is really a critical moment to use this knowledge to support students in an equitable and effective and cost-effective way through high-impact tutoring. Please check out our website and feel free to reach out with any questions, suggestions, or requests for support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susanna. It is so important that we design tutoring efforts with research in mind so that what we do can be impactful. The shift in dosage and the focus on both student relationships and learning really stuck with me, and I look forward to your comments when we get to the panel.
Thank you.
Next, we have Dr. Jeannie Barker. Jeannie is the Director of Schools for Lenoir City School District in Lenoir City, Tennessee, and was recognized as the East Tennessee Superintendent of the Year in 2020. Dr. Barker is active in the community and serves on a number of boards, including the Loudoun County Educational Foundation, the Little Tennessee Valley Educational Cooperative, the Boys and Girls Club of Loudoun County, and has been part of Leadership Loudoun and the Tennessee Regional Leadership Class. Dr. Barker earned her EDD in Educational Leadership from Trevecca Nazarene University. Thanks for being with us today, Jeannie. Jeannie, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to share what we have done in Lenoir City, and especially I'm thankful to hear the research from Dr. Loeb that she just presented. Much of what I heard there has been played out in some form or fashion in our opportunity to begin a pilot in Lenoir City schools. So I'd like to say thank you for that. And the recognition that all schools in the nation are working hard right now to try to figure out a way to accelerate student learning. We have been in the mindset of intervention for years, but what we are seeing as a need now is to accelerate. And we have launched this high dosage tutoring opportunity in our school system and have found some results that I would like to share with you. So the next screen will tell you a little bit about what we have done. We first of all identified a problem in our school district, and what we've identified was the fact that students, sophomores mainly, had missed half of their geometry class in the spring. We are in a block scheduling in our high school. And so last spring, due to the school interruptions with COVID, they lost half of their instruction for geometry in face-to-face instruction. Credit was given because, with the interruption, then, the policy said that as of March 16th, 2020, students would get credit and a grade. And I understand that for graduation, making sure graduation was maintained and they were on track. However, the reality was that as we began to work with our students, we found that credit was not the same as attaining the skills that they needed to progress successfully in the area of math. So students this year were having a lot of difficulty in Algebra 2. And so we identified that problem. We also knew that this was going to be the first opportunity for our juniors to take the ACT, and geometry is a critical piece of what they need to know to be able to accomplish a good score on the ACT. So once we identified that problem, then we began working to see what we could do about that. And thankfully, we were working with a group of educators in the CERN network to look at research-based options and creatively see what might be a solution for this. So as we began to work on what we called our high-dose tutoring pilot, we decided that we would think big and how could this project really impact student achievement. But we knew in order to make it work, we needed to start small and work out the kinks as the implementation began. So initially, I pulled in my math coach in the district and shared with her this concept of high-dose tutoring and tasked her with getting together some thoughts on what we needed to do to make this work. She did a wonderful job of identifying staff for actually implementing tutoring. And we were focusing again, as I said, on geometry. So we had the opportunity to pull in some retired teachers and some currently employed teachers. We didn't have a lot of time to get this started, so we used the resources we had at hand. And so we began working with the staff, and we identified those staff. We began to work with students. One of the best things that we did was to identify students on a voluntary basis. So many times in schools, we assign students to additional help. This was a voluntary kind of thing. We heard from some students that they needed extra help, so we asked them. We invited them to participate and then made phone calls home to parents. One of the heartwarming stories that was repeated time and time again is that when we talked with the students, they were excited about participating. And then when we made a call home to the parents, they were extremely supportive. They said, of course, I want my child to have this opportunity. So we did that. My instructional coach worked to make sure that we had a process for a pre-test and a post-test of the students that would start the tutoring opportunity. And we provided both during the day, after school, and Saturday virtual opportunities. We pulled time from the day in a homeroom class that we started this year on a regular basis due to trying to meet the social emotional needs of students. So to have that connection. And so we utilized some of that time for this. We also have been able to realize the importance of the social emotional and relationship connection that our tutors have with students. And as we worked through this pilot and began to look at what the students were saying and how they were performing, it was just eye-opening and inspiring to see how important this project had become to them. So we were leveraging every opportunity we had, every minute that we could find, every teacher. We had a couple of retired teachers that wanted to help, and so we had a couple of them that were actually running some of our virtual sessions as well, because we wanted to make sure that we had consistency in what we were offering our students. So again, we thought big, but we really did start small, and it started with those individual conversations with students and families, and that was critical for our success. Next slide, please. So as we worked through our opportunity for students, we set up a way that we could design to assess whether or not this was actually helpful and whether it was working. So not only did we measure attendance, and that was based on 3 or more sessions a week, we also gave a pre-test and a post-test. And then just recently, our students took the ACT. Many of them who were juniors, it was the first time they had taken the ACT. So we've looked at students individually to see what their projected score was based on their previous test record, and then what they actually scored. And then we had a couple of students that were seniors that had already taken the ACT once. So we have compared their previous ACT score in math to their current ACT score. And we just got those back last week. And I can tell you 18 of 19 of students made progress on their pre and post test. And then I can also tell you now that we have the ACT results, 54% of the students made greater than a 19% or a 19 in math. 33% of the students in the high dose tutoring made greater than 21 on the ACT. So we are ecstatic with the results that we have found. We had 2 of those students that were a second time test taker, and they exceeded 21. So what that means to those students who were in that is changing. They've met the criteria for college entrance. They've met the criteria in math on ACT for many of the scholarship opportunities that Tennessee offers. The positive comments that students have made based on their experience in this particular project is one that truly, truly is inspiring. Again, here are some of the results from the student reviews. You can see that when the researchers asked these questions, we didn't ask them ourselves, but when the researchers asked questions of students as far as what their opinions were, you can see there. One of the things that stood out so much was that students loved the personal attention. And these were students that were invested. Remember, this was a voluntary opportunity for them. So they were very invested in wanting to improve and appreciative of the fact that we listened to them. One of the students kept saying, I felt listened to. I felt like my teachers were listening to me. I felt like the school was listening to me to give me this opportunity. When we talked with the teachers, I think this was something that really helped me gain traction in understanding that this is a legitimate strategy for, as I heard earlier, be called an enduring practice. I do believe this is something we are trying to incorporate for the spring by working with our 8th graders and letting some of our juniors be some tutors, and that way build not only their skill level, but also giving a mentor as they go into high school to meet some of those social emotional needs that continue to be out there. And then I was very excited when I heard Dr. Loeb talk about the benefits that the tutors actually gain in this. I see, and you can see some examples of our teachers here. It truly is authentic assessment for them to identify what students need individually. It's professional growth. One of the outcomes of our tutoring session was that one of our teachers who was not being a tutor sat in on a tutoring session and observed our math coach providing the tutoring session, and she learned some strategies to implement in her classroom. So again, it's a wonderful professional development opportunity. It's a way to grow teachers for the next generation, but it's also a way of developing those relationships that are so meaningful in making students successful as they go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie, for showing us what high dosage tutoring can look like. Very exciting. The 5-week pilot seems to have really been impactful to your thinking going forward. You've seen results for your students. It's a great example of how leaders can really jump into it thoughtfully while working out operational hurdles that will inevitably show up when adopting new practices. And I look forward to hearing more when we get to the panel. Next is Carrie Randolph. Carrie is the Executive Officer for Strategic Investments for Metro Nashville Public Schools. She works to align resources with the strategic plan to support students and increase student achievement. She previously served as the Assistant Superintendent of Innovation at the Hamilton County Department of Education and as the Vice President of Learning at the Public Education Foundation in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Most recently, Carrie earned a Doctorate of Education Leadership from Harvard University and served as Director of Pre-K-12 Programs and Professor of Practice at Tulane University in New Orleans. Thanks for being with us today, Carrie.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm excited to share, and it was so great to hear from Jeannie and the work in Lenoir City. This is certainly an area that we are not experts in, but I'm excited to share our journey with you. Our journey began last summer with two really industrious, amazing class of 2020 Vanderbilt graduates who had a delay in their job and had really watched the news and were concerned about the learning loss conversation that started as schools closed due to the pandemic in March. And they approached us, and we are so grateful for that, with a program that they had launched that's now a nonprofit called Bright Path. And initially, we launched Bright Path in support of our class of 2020 graduates who were matriculating to Nashville State Community College. And again, school had shut down for them in March, and we really wanted to create that insulated pipeline for them. We originally were able to match 25 of those MNPS graduates with tutors. These were volunteer near-peer tutors, mostly Vanderbilt students. And it was really on demand. So it was on demand, student driven. We used an Accuplacer curriculum. We really were working to make sure those students could enter Nashville State College ready and not take remedial courses. And it was volunteer. And you can see I put a screenshot of the very simple platform that Bright Path developed, where if you were a student, you could go on and request tutoring, schedule a session, match with a tutor, and it was a fairly automated system for both the tutor and the student. Next slide. So we built from that really small pilot last summer to an expansion this fall. You know, one of the things that was helpful to our students during the pandemic is we were able to expand dual enrollment opportunities due to the virtual setting. So we had about 100 additional students that were able to take advantage of dual enrollment last fall. And we tried to really intentionally pair them with tutors to make sure that that was a really positive experience and a successful early post-secondary opportunity. And we also launched tutoring with sales math. So we matched in the same method I just mentioned. It was raise your hand with lots of encouragement from a teacher, free tutoring with a near-peer tutor. 45 students were served through that. We did keep data on both the student and tutor. We collected weekly feedback from them. The sessions weren't super regular. It was really dependent on the student. We encouraged them to do 2 to 3 times a week, but it did vary. We learned a lot of lessons from that and really dug into the research that Susanna did such a good job of synthesizing before. And we really did some intense planning last fall to launch what we're doing now. So this spring, we have launched High-Dosage Tutoring. I don't love the word pilot. I would call it an intentional, implementation. We certainly want to go bigger. Currently in MNPS, 150 students across grades 3 through 9 are receiving high dosage tutoring. That means it's at least 30 minutes, 3 times a week, and it's embedded in the school day. This was huge. We moved from a volunteer, like let me raise my hand, student driven, to embedded in the school day during our personalized learning time. We've launched in 3 schools, and according to the research and our MAP data, our assessment data, we launched for grades 3 through 5 in literacy, and then grades 6 through 9 in numeracy. And it is one-on-one tutoring with a volunteer tutor. So we are using mostly university students who are receiving support through weekly sessions as well as an initial orientation training. And we are working to connect them with curriculum from our adopted materials. It's much more coordinated and targeted than what we were doing before, not really student driven anymore, but much more intentional based on student data and what we're seeing for that individual student and their needs. But we're still using volunteers, and I'll stress that because we have bigger plans. I will say just a word about the launch of the pilot with the 3 schools. We did create a prioritized school list of where we thought there was a really strong environment for tutoring and where there was a great need. Next slide. We were trying to get at this Venn diagram you see on the right. So certainly there is, as Susanna mentioned, a strong research base in tutoring, which, as she said, I will echo, is not usual in our field. So we really tried to draw on that around impact. And that's where we got what we're calling that gold standard, regular, committed, a tutor with a relationship with the student. All of it's virtual, by the way, but we worked on also sustainability and feasibility from the beginning. So I'll just say a few words about these key decision points for us. That tutor pool was significant. We found that our teachers are working very hard. We've asked a lot of them during the pandemic to shift to a virtual environment, in some cases to a new curriculum. And so we did decide to focus on a volunteer tutor pool for now, and then focus on support and mentoring for that particular pool. Tutor support's been really significant. We've partnered with Vanderbilt Peabody on this, where there are weekly sessions hosted based on the curriculum, based on our pacing guide and curriculum, and then office hours where tutors can get individualized support for their work with their student. The curriculum piece is one we're still working on, to be frank, but we are using adopted materials and pushing material to tutors, providing that support through those weekly sessions. And then we are also working with tutors on helping assess the students' needs. So we're working now on how can they interpret MAP scores, how can we provide information on that very targeted individualized piece. Because in January, we really launched a big initiative around every student known, respected, cared for, and supported. And along with that, focused outcomes that are really focused on the individual student and their growth, which is what we really think is needed all the time, but especially in the times we're in now with the pandemic. So we're really working to align tutoring with those goals around personalization and support for individual students. And I'd love to echo something that Jeannie said around relationships. We know this is really important, and that's why that tutor student relationship we keep constant. So once you're matched with a tutor, that's your tutor. And one of the things that we're focused on too is that near peer piece and developing a college going identity, since so many of our students are working with university students. The student recruitment and matching we've worked with schools on, as well as with test scores. We are working with at least about 50 students at each tier, so elementary, middle, and high, and partnered with Brown and Annenberg to do evaluation of that, as we are every day, I hope you've heard this from me, pivoting and changing as we learn from our students, tutors, and teachers about what's needed. Next slide. So what's next? We're already actively planning. We know, as you've heard echoed across all the speakers today, that this is an important intervention and support for our students. So we are trying to work to transition to high dosage tutoring district-wide. As Sharon said, none of us are new to tutoring. We have tutoring happening in some of our schools, and we have other partnerships. But we, based on the research and based on our experience so far, know this is a high leverage, high impact strategy. So we're working to shift our partnerships and work with students to this high dosage model. So we're creating toolkits for families, for our schools, so they can implement for themselves in the ways that work best for their students. And we're pushing in to help, as well as partners. We are working on continuing to increase our volunteer tutor pool and the support that's needed there. But one of our next steps is to strategically deploy paid tutors as well, teachers, retired teachers, paraprofessionals, as have been mentioned. We are also, like I said, working to expand that tutor pool with a focus on equity. So many of our current higher ed tutors or tutors from higher ed come from Vanderbilt. We have a very diverse student body in MNPS, so we are working to expand and make sure our tutors look like and have experiences similar to our students to leverage those relationships and near peer opportunities with a focus on equity. And then we're doing a much deeper dive into tutor training and support. And I'm working hard on that teacher-tutor communication. How are we sharing key data around a student so we can get that really personalized push that we know is so important. So we have a lot of work to do, but that's a quick overview of where we are now.
Thank you, Carrie, for sharing the last several months of work that you're doing, you're learning about, and you're doing now, and how all of this is shaping Metro's strategy for high dosage tutoring. Between Lenoir City and Metro's examples, I think we can see how districts of all sizes and complexities can approach this work in ways that leverage the strengths of those districts. Lenoir City in standing up a nimble pilot, and Metro's example of drawing on the resources and expertise of their community. As we prepare to move into the panel, I want to get some feedback from the audience to gauge where you are in your learning. So I want you to take a moment, answer the question that you see on the screen. Which of the following high-dosage tutoring design principles feel the hardest to address in your community? Is it frequency, 30-minute sessions 3 times a week, for example? Group size, no more than 4 students per tutor? Scheduling, embedded in the school day, as the research tells us? Training, ongoing training for all tutors? Progress monitoring, robust systems for collecting and responding to data on tutoring? So give you just a few more seconds to make your choice. Let's go ahead and see the poll results, if we have those. Right. So scheduling seems to stand out as the area that's the strongest and that we're most worried about, but we have other people that are concerned about all of those. So I'm sure the panelists have taken note of where our challenges may be, and we'll have some good advice on how to overcome them. For our panel, we're joined by Courtney Bell, SCORE's Senior Director of Research and Innovation, who leads and oversees our team's research, data analysis, and innovative practice work. Thank you for moderating this conversation, Courtney.
Thank you, Sharon. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to dig in a little bit with the folks you just shared with us and to hear more about their experiences. So Dr. Loeb, I may turn to you first. I'd love to just hear your reactions as you just heard these 2 districts share how they are applying the research. What resonated with you about their approaches? What things that they're pursuing do you think could be replicable for other places? And where might they be able to deepen the work?
Yeah, it was just wonderful to hear about both of these districts and what's going on. What I liked so much about them is in both cases, you're thinking about how can I provide students with the highest quality tutoring, not how can I take tutoring and give a little bit to everybody, because I think the trickiest thing in our hope to expand tutoring is the potential that we will just kind of dilute it to the extent that it's not helpful anymore. And it's much better to do what each of these districts have done, which is to do it the best you can for a small group of students, see how that works, build from there, really think about what students need it the most. I love that focus on geometry, because when you have a focus like that, you can really make the program fit the needs that you have. And then the second element that I think you just can't emphasize enough is how important the student tutor relationship is, and the importance of social emotional learning, and both of these programs again are addressing that by having a consistent tutor. And really, I do think that if I think about the 2 programs, they each have one thing that you might say, oh no, it doesn't match, and that's using volunteers, and both for the tutor and then for the students. But I think they've done it in a really interesting way. So in terms of volunteers for tutors, I think in general, we haven't found them to be as effective, but often volunteer programs don't have the structure that other programs have. And it may be that you can have really effective volunteers if they're provided with strong materials and all those things that we think really go into a program, high dosage and a focus on SEL. I'm really optimistic that we can do good things with volunteers, even though it is, I think, more evidence for teachers. And in terms of student volunteering, there's a real difference between volunteering into a really intensive program and each day having to kind of say, do I need a tutor today? And what problems am I having? That doesn't work. Having a program that's just available and people can volunteer in when they want them, they go and have a tutor available to them. We know that's not very effective. But sometimes, particularly to start, if you find families and students that are interested in it, particularly if they're the students in need, that may be a good group to start with. I would really want to know if if it's still equitable, if you're still reaching the kids you want to, but having them engage in it directly is could be a really good thing as well, particularly in this stage.
Really good words of advice there. And I know Carrie and Jeannie, y'all have both been very open in sharing that this is a work in progress for you. But I know for a lot of people, this seems really overwhelming to think about, especially with the myriad other things you have on your plate, from determining how to spend federal dollars to planning for summer learning. So I'd love, as you were thinking about high dosage tutoring as a strategy, what was kind of the first step you took to get the program started? Because sometimes it's just taking that first step that gets the ball rolling. So Jeannie, I may turn to you first.
Yes, and it's critical. We had a sense of urgency, so we had to spin up very quickly. And so I had to go to somebody that I knew would persevere when we came upon obstacles, and could creatively keep the students in mind as we were trying to determine how we could get our tutors in place, where we would find the time. And so I think it's critical that in districts that we find those people who are possibility thinkers to help us get something new started. And in our case, it was our math coach. And she did a wonderful job of explaining to our tutors and providing materials to our tutors and keeping abreast of any issues that came up with the tutors. So I think it was finding that key person who would take it on and persevere. That's what helped us spin up very quickly, and I believe had helped us have the success that we saw initially. Enough so that we're believers now, and we're going to try to make it more of an enduring practice as we go further.
Thanks for that. And Carrie, I know I've heard you share a lot of those same things. I think having coordination and taking it off the school leader's back is really important. Would you share a little bit about what that's looked like in Metro?
Right. So I think I would echo what Jeannie said, but to add, the infrastructure was significant. I mean, this is all virtual. And so, how do you actually, background check all the tutors? How do you make sure they're connected? How are you monitoring? All those things that Susanna was mentioning before was a key hurdle that what we saw is if we could break that down for our students and our schools, it removed that barrier. And I didn't get to mention this before, but we are 150 students now, but we have a goal of 500 by the end of the summer, which I think we've set ourselves up for, because hopefully more, but I'll say at least 500. But we've set ourselves up for that because we've really thought through that sustainability and feasibility piece I was mentioning before, and been learning lessons all along the way, as you mentioned, Courtney, but I'm really trying to pivot as we go. But that infrastructure was key. There was tons of questions about that in the beginning.
Great. And then I know you both sort of alluded to this already, but just would love for you to share more about how you're thinking about this as an enduring strategy. Obviously, for the next couple of years, districts in Tennessee and across the country will have an influx of resources from federal dollars that can be leveraged for this. But how are you thinking about this longer term, building time into your schedules, thinking about a cadence for onboarding tutors? Have you gotten that far, or where are you at with that? And feel free to jump in, whoever would like to take that first.
Well, we are going to work initially this spring with trying to build a pipeline from our 8th graders to the high school. So we're going to work on trying to do that, but also at the same time, we would like to have some training materials. And I don't know if those are already created. Maybe Susanna, you could link me up with something that might be appropriate. Some training materials for tutors. We do have a cadre of tutors that we have assessed in a pot of money in our ESSER funds to implement this on a larger scale. And as we get to that point, so we are looking to use some of our ESSER dollars and trying this particular strategy so that we can meet the needs of a wide number of students, but it still make it on the personal level, because people matter. And so that's where we're going next.
And I would echo that too. We're certainly thinking along the same lines. We're kind of in an interesting place because we've spiraled some ESSER funds down to our schools, and we're encouraging them to consider implementing tutoring at the school level. So we kind of have we've been pushing into support as a support hub from central office, but now we're seeing, schools raising their hands that they want to deploy tutoring. So those toolkits I mentioned and helping them do it in this gold standard research-based model, like how can we push in and support so that it's really owned at the school level? That's where it lives, right, with the students. So, and then also, we're also just honestly trying to really target some places where we think it's desperately needed based on student and school data. So we have this we're going to meet in the middle in this great place for kids, I hope, around both, and infuse our tutor pool. We're going to keep expanding that volunteer pool and work with all those great community partners we have, but also, as I mentioned, work toward Jeannie's model of really those paid tutors that have that expertise that we also think can work with more than one student at a time, for example. So as we think about impact, we're trying to think on those multiple levels.
Great, thank you.
We do have all those tools, and either they're up on our website or reach out to me, and I'd be happy to provide whatever we have.
Yeah, and to that point, I know a couple of folks have been asking in the Q&A about getting the slides from this. We are recording this webinar. We will share that out with folks after. We will also share all the materials as well as a link to the resources at the National Student Support Accelerator. And then we have also combed through and curated a lot of those resources and combined them with some resources we pulled together from both Jeannie and Carrie into an implementation guide. So we'll be sharing that with folks out as well afterwards. So you should have all of the resources you could ever dream of. And Dr. Loeb, I'd love to turn to you again, just thinking about the long history of tutoring. What has to be true to ensure that this doesn't fall by the wayside and turn out the way that previous tutoring efforts have turned out, which is not having very much effect on students?
Yeah, I think we know so much more about these elements. Just the fact that both of you are implementing this with such high quality, really tracking kids and how they're learning and adjusting so that they learn more and can gain more kind of engagement in school and sense of success that tutoring can provide. So I'm really optimistic that if we can really agree and share a language about what good tutoring is, what high impact tutoring is, then we can really make this good for students in this moment where we have this great opportunity. Then the trick is how, when we don't have the funds that are coming right now from the federal government, from philanthropy, how do we make this stick? And I think part of that is really tracking and finding out if it is an effective way, and if so, I think there'll be a lot more energy. If we track it and we can share it, there'll be a lot more energy for keeping it in the future, so that I hope we can do that. And then we have to think, I mean, funding cliffs are always a problem. I'm really hoping that we figure out a way that isn't the issue, that scheduling is the issue, that we overcome scheduling, because it's always been an issue, and it's an issue here now. But I think that if we can overcome that, then the only other hurdle is this kind of funding. But at least the funding that's coming in now is for a couple of years, which allows us to think about whether we can embed this in districts and in schools. And if we can, I think we have a much better chance of having this be successful in the long run.
That's great. And then I would love if you all could share a little bit more. I know you gave brief overviews, but of the actual modality of delivering the tutoring. So were the tutors virtual? Were the students virtual? What did that look like? And were there places where you saw the tutoring being more or less effective based on whether or not the tutor and or the student were virtual? And Carrie, I might go to you first on that one.
Sure. We're virtual on both sides. The tutor is virtual and the student is virtual, whether the student's in person or not. We have found that noise canceling headphones are very important when there's multiple students in the same room receiving tutoring. So that's probably obvious, but it's something to consider. We plan to continue in that mode for now. I do think there's a world in which, but if you think about when you're using volunteers, the ask is for, maybe 2 hours a week total, no travel time, right? You can really focus on, there's some real convenience there, and for this school, right? We don't have it, and right now we can't do those people in and out of this school. And what we're finding is, students have lost a lot. We've all lost a lot this year, but their technology skills are pretty great at this point, and students can really maneuver this very well and have learned to build relationships over these little screens that we're all looking at. It's not the same, but I do think one of the outcomes here is that there's some real capacity there that we can tap into to get tutoring to as many students as possible.
And we have had a lot of experiences here. We've tried to keep schools open from August the 7th on, and we have had success, particularly K-5. But in 6-12, we have had to move to an every other day opportunity with the option of every day for some of those students that needed it the most. So a lot of our high-dose tutoring was actually face-to-face. It might not have been every day, though, because of the schedule, and that was one of the challenges that we had to face. But we did have also some Saturday sessions and some virtual sessions. So again, just like Carrie was saying, we live in a world now where people are used to having multiple ways of engaging, and we've got to make the best of every opportunity we have for student success. And so we envision that we will continue some of those things. However, we had the best engagement when it was face-to-face, and we did have, in some opportunities, students 2 to 3 with a tutor in order to maximize that opportunity for students. I can say that our attendance was better with the face-to-face students, because sometimes the virtual students get lost or technology issues arise. So we found that was best for us. However, we'll always offer additional opportunities. I think that's just the world we live in now.
And Courtney, if I can add really quickly, something I didn't say, it's taken effort, so I want to say that up front, but we've had 95% attendance at our tutoring sessions, no matter what the modality was. Now that's taken some effort, phone calls, encouragement from teachers, encouragement from their navigator, and others, but we've hit 95% this week, which is exciting.
That's great. And I think that just speaks to the importance of that infrastructure, having a person who is over this, thinking about it every day. It's not just an easy add-on, but there really has to be a structure of support around this. So in just a minute, I'm going to shift to some questions that we've gotten from folks in the audience, but I wanted to ask each of you to quickly give one final piece of advice you'd have for districts to keep in mind as they are thinking about designing their tutoring programs. Maybe something that you didn't do at first, or something you did do that you wish you hadn't. But if you had one piece of advice to give to a district who's thinking about high-dosage tutoring right now, what would that be?
I will go ahead and start. One of the things that I think made our program so successful was the phone call to parents, even for high school students. I think sometimes we forget how important that family connection is. And the phone calls, we could invite high school students all day long, but that sometimes doesn't get communicated home. So starting with a personal phone call home was one of the best things that we did.
Well, I just want to repeat what Carrie said earlier, which is I love this, every student known, cared for, and supported. And I really think that that's what's fundamental to tutoring. And as much as you can keep that in mind and design the tutoring around that so that it is meeting the students where they are and supporting them and advocating for them, I think that you'll have a successful program.
Yeah, I'll share a lesson learned. This is something I wish someone had said to us as we were really diving into this. Is we invited students to participate, but we did it in a very targeted way. And during PLT time that I mentioned, because it's happening during this school day, it is a mixed setting where some students are receiving tutoring and some students aren't. And we need to really think about how that's messaged to students. We targeted students in the 20th to 80th percentile, so it's a really actually wide range, but I'm not sure we did a really great job of communicating this great opportunity and why. And I think we're thinking about that now. So back to Jeannie's point about communication, I think communicating to the student the why and the purpose and what it means is really important too.
That's great. So I'm going to jump in with some questions from the chat. We had a couple of people asking about what can be done to help foster that relationship between students and tutors, and if you all have any words of advice for how to ensure that those relationships start out on strong footing and that students are able to benefit from that social emotional element of having an adult who cares for them.
I can add that this was part of our training and something that we've worked on, because these weren't teachers, paraprofessionals, right? These were mostly college students. We provided just some simple SEL prompts, like a script, and encouraged them. And we have released those over time so that they are having these kind of I'll call them like get to know you conversations that are a bit targeted to build relationships from the beginning. And certainly people know how to do that, but some of our university students that aren't familiar with working or aren't comfortable with students as comfortable, we provide these scripts and they seem to have worked fairly well. It was a really low lift, and we'd be happy to share those.
Jeannie or Susanna, anything else to add there?
I would just echo it. I think that's really one of the more important parts of the initial training that you do, as well as kind of safety issues. And that scripts and other kinds of high quality materials are really important for tutors, particularly if you don't have experienced certified teachers as your tutors. And you just have to realize where they're starting from. And they really have a willingness to use these materials, and it can be helpful for student learning to have, to be able to track them, and that tutoring is a good place for this. So when you're thinking about tutoring, make sure you have some of those scripts, both for the social emotional, but also for if you're trying to teach the students reading or early literacy or math, that they really know what they should be working on.
That's great, thank you. And then another question is around just thinking about staffing this long term. So wanting to scale this up to serve a lot of students. Would love to hear how both of you are thinking about kind of pools of folks that you might tap into. And I definitely hear Susanna's push to be careful with volunteers and making sure that there is robust training and when volunteers are utilized. But would love to hear how you guys are thinking about those staffing models for this moving forward.
I think it is very important for us to build for sustainability. And in that, I think as we begin with some of the training opportunities that Carrie and Susanna talked about, that we build that opportunity. And I believe success breeds success. So when our tutors are successful, I see that as being an ongoing opportunity, not only for teachers or teachers who may choose to retire, but also for our volunteers. And as we get into, as you saw in Lenoir City, we did not use that particular strategy this time. But in order for it to be sustainable, we're going to have to move into that. So it will be very important to, I think, have the training. And then I believe when tutors are successful, it will be kind of addictive. They'll want to continue that.
I would add, we're thinking about lots of pools. I've mentioned some of these. Certainly the volunteer, we have 25 universities in the area. We're really fortunate that way. And so leveraging them in their educator preparation programs. We also are looking to community organizations. We have a lot of folks raising their hand, which is really fantastic in the corporate world. So we've developed a tutor screen. It's not a screening tool. It's like an interest tool where we can hopefully target like age group as well as expertise and be targeted there, and to try to get us a little further down the road on the training side. And I would say that, and here's a piece of advice: the initial training is good, but like all teachers, I'm a teacher, you have to have something to hang it on. So we do a small initial training and then follow up after the first week of sessions where there's this real need to know on the tutor's part. We found that that works pretty well. So I would suggest that. And we have these weekly recorded trainings they can attend live or in person, or watch it later. And then we have those follow-up office hours, and we're constantly surveying tutors and checking in with them. We do checks with tutors, calls, if you will. And I think in the volunteer space, that's really important. So as we move into that I'll call it the corporate pool, corporate volunteer pool, we're thinking a lot about that and the expertise there. And then we are looking at paid tutors and across the spectrum there, who paraprofessionals, kind of advanced EPP, educator preparation students who have reached a certain course level and have some expertise. So and of course our teachers and how we can use them outside of the school day. So we're thinking about all those pools. We think they all will be important.
Wonderful. Well, there are many more great questions that we will not have the time to get to because I know folks are very busy right now. But I want to take a moment just to thank all of our guests today for sharing so openly about what they're learning and what their challenges are and how they're thinking about this work moving forward. I know it's always insightful for me to hear about how you all are approaching this work, and I'm really hopeful about the potential of this work to really serve a lot of students in our state well as we begin the long work of recovering from the pandemic. So thank you so much to our panelists, and I'm going to hand it back over to Sharon to close us out with the next steps.
Thank you, Courtney. We know that many district leaders are actively strategizing around high dosage tutoring or starting to do that, particularly ahead of the summer learning camps and as we begin implementation of the early literacy legislation that ramps up through 2024. I'm so thankful for the leaders today who have showed us not just their successes, but their questions and challenges as they bring high dosage tutoring to more and more students, which comes with its own complexities of scale and maintaining quality and sustainability. As we close out this discussion, I'm thankful to our panelists and experts sharing how we can leverage high dosage tutoring as an essential recovery and learning acceleration strategy. I'm particularly taken by where we are in this work and what we've seen today. There's a rare and overwhelming research consensus on the effectiveness of high dosage tutoring, and there are emerging examples based on the research in Tennessee. And we still have work to do on recruiting and training tutors, ensuring students attend and benefit from it, and align it to learning. We placed a feedback survey for the webinar in the chat so that hopefully you will take that immediately after we conclude this session. So we have a better idea of how to support you in your work on behalf of students. You'll also receive an email from us after the webinar that includes the implementation guide that Courtney mentioned previously. We hope that it will help interested districts think through high dosage tutoring in your own communities. And for those of you who indicate in the survey that you received that you'd like some support to think through this further, we'll be reaching out to schedule a time to talk with you and your team. If others find themselves needing support later on, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly at sharon@tnscore.org, as we'd love to be a thought partner for you as you pursue this important work. Finally, we want to share some upcoming opportunities for you to engage with us in another SCORE Institute. On April 19th at 2:30 Central Time, that's a Monday, we are going to have one on summer learning. And this will be an opportunity to learn from both national research and best practice, as well as Tennessee districts who have strong plans that they're willing to share. And then later in May, with a date to be determined, we are planning a SCORE Institute on leveraging federal stimulus for recovery and reinvention information. I really look forward to hearing from everyone who attended this webinar. We have a moment to get this right, to emerge from the pandemic with practices that make schools better than when we entered the pandemic. To our district leaders and educators, we see you. We see the hard work you've done this last year to serve students. And what I ask of you now is to begin to shift to recovery. We didn't prevent the worst of the pandemic's impact on students, only to go back to a normal that didn't serve all students well. SCORE stands ready to support you as you ensure all Tennessee students get the education they deserve. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks to our panelists, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day.